Hello everyone, this is Stardust, and right now I'm going to give you just a very fast, very basic, fundamental breakdown of how the hop-up unit in your AEG works. This graphic is based off M4 hop units, but we're not going to get into that right now, and we're not going to be going into detail on like upgrades and what effect they have and what changes they have and what different systems there are, but I'm just going to be talking about the basis around which literally every single hop unit in this hobby kind of more or less works, and how that can lead to issues, what parts can cause issues, and how to identify those issues. So basically, this is a basic guide on how to diagnose. So let's start at the front, right? And just start over here where I'm putting the circle right now, right? So what we've got over here is in yellow our inner barrel. This will have a inner diameter of typically 6.05 to 6.0 millimeters, which basically is marginally wider than the BB. The basic concept behind this is that there will be pressure built up behind the BB, and that pressure will propel it down the barrel, gaining speed as it goes, because that pressure is maintained. Meaning that our number one cause of failure with the inner barrel can be pressure drop-off, which can be due to a scuffed inner barrel. It can be due to a too wide inner barrel. On the contrary, the inner barrel can also be obstructive directly to the BB, which can again happen because of a scuffed or dirty inner barrel, or can happen because of a too tight inner barrel. So that's our first cause. If you have an issue with your inner barrel, the typical symptoms you will notice is either that the BB will get stuck somewhere along the inner barrel, which can also be all the way back here in the hop unit, which is the most common, or you will see that the BB rolls out of the barrel. Then let's move back here. In green around this we have our hop rubber. Some people call it a hop-up bucking. I'm going to call it a hop rubber because that's essentially what it is. It's a little sleeve that wraps around your hop rubber. The little yellow window here isn't actually a window in the hop rubber, but it's in the barrel. So that's not quite accurate, but I needed to highlight it somehow. That window is a cutout in the barrel where your hop rubber has a little nub. That nub interfaces with your BB and gives it some spin. This will basically stabilize your BB's flight path. That's a very basic principle of a hop-up. The pink part above that interfaces with that. Basically, this blue part here is your hop-up arm. That arm is mounted around a single swivel anchor point, and oh, that's not right. Wait, what? Anyway, that arm is mounted around a little swivel anchor point that I'm drawing in now because I just deleted it, and this side here essentially is gonna be getting moved up and down, which creates an axis around this little swivel point, thereby applying more or less pressure to the little pink part, which we call a tensioner or nub, which presses into the cutout window on the barrel and increases or decreases the pressure that the hop rubber will have, as well as changes the shape of it, again changing the way that they interface. That basically is meant to do two things. A, when your BB is sitting here in the chamber, imagine that this is the BB, right? Nothing's stopping it from just rolling down the barrel. That BB wants to just roll. It's smaller than the barrel, so it's just gonna go. So that's why we need something in the way, be that just the nub itself, or be that the tensioner that puts pressure on it, that will hold the BB in place. It will also give it a spin when it transfers through. That spin will stabilize its flight path, like I already said. This is basically the most important difference in how precise your AEG will be. You can hit crazy long distances on relatively low power AEGs with a good tensioner and rubber. Now, common issues with this will be too loose or too tight setting on the hop up. If your setting is too loose, the BB will just start rolling down the barrel, which means that the pressure from the nozzle doesn't go to the BB but actually gets exerted downwards out of the hop unit and doesn't propel your BB forward. This commonly causes the BB to roll out of the end of the barrel or drop off drastically after just a meter or two. The second common mistake is a too tight hop rubber. Now this is a little bit difficult to diagnose because it can also cause a barrel roller. However, it will typically not do that. The BB will typically just get stuck and not be able to move. If you have BBs stuck in here, check for any crushed BBs that could still be sitting inside the barrel, which can cause damage to the barrel and scuff it, so you want to push them out the end with a cleaning rod. And B, loosen your hop setting and see if that helps. That's basically our main points of failure around the hop unit compression parts. So from there, let's move on to the next part. Now we're moving our way along the externals at first, because the part over here is actually inside the gearbox, so you'll have to open the gearbox in order to change anything about it. So we're going to start with the other things, because not only are they easier to check, but if one of them is the issue, you don't actually have to open your gearbox for it, and it just makes the fix a little bit easier. Pictured here at the bottom is a very, very crude recreation of a magazine. Essentially, we have our BBs, and we have our feed lips / our feed hole. Inside there is a little segment. That segment is spring-loaded and pushes forward. It's on an angle, so when you insert it, the hop unit will push it aside, letting BBs come in. Now, when this is loose, that doesn't happen. Basically, your magazine will be held by your mag catch, and only by your mag catch, interfacing with a little hole. Magazines are built to different standards by different manufacturers. We do have a standard spec, but manufacturers often drastically deviate from that spec. Not everyone uses TM specs. Some have extended followers in order to have a mag cutoff. Basically, there's a lot of different features with a lot of different brands of magazines that mean that these specifications aren't always right. This can create a lot of wobble. And basically, if there's wobble in between here, then this yellow part doesn't get pushed aside and doesn't let BBs in. And that's not always an absolute. Sometimes when firing your gun, the recoil will, because there will always be a little bit of vibration coming from the gearbox, that can inconsistently shuffle around the magazine, causing it to inconsistently sometimes feed, sometimes not feed. So if you're having trouble feeding and your mag is loose, check that. Try pushing the mag in from the bottom and holding it stiff in position and shoot it like that. If your feed issue persists, it's probably something else, or what it could also be could be the follower. I haven't drawn in the follower because I'm dumb. But basically, the follower here that I'm currently very crudely drawing in here, yeah, that's basically just a little block of plastic that pushes the BBs up, and underneath it, here at the bottom, is a spring. And unfortunately, those springs, they do wear out over time. And different manufacturers make different quality springs. I know that E&C are known for having relatively good springs. I know that G&G are known for having relatively good springs. I know that SEMA magazines catch quite a bit of flack for not having that good springs. I know that APS magazines tend to be shit. But the thing is, they change a lot. These are not consistent values. These manufacturers are constantly cost optimizing their product. So there will always be small changes. And especially that magazine spring. Magazines get produced in crazy volumes compared to guns. If a gun gets made 10,000 times, each owner will, theoretically, want at least 3 more magazines. So that's an additional 30,000 magazines, plus the 10,000 that get shipped with the individual guns, plus more for the aftermarket. So let's say for every 10,000 guns, you get 60, 70,000 magazines that are produced. And unfortunately, when you have 60, 70,000 magazines in production, a 3 cent or 2 cent spring in each of those magazines, a little bit overestimated here. But basically, whether that spring costs 1 cent or half a cent makes a difference for the manufacturer, so it's attractive for them to cut corners there. That's a very, very common issue with feeding issues, actually. It's just a 2-week spring. That's magazine issues. They're more common than you might think. Different brands have different specs, like I said, and a lot of people aren't aware of that when they first get into it, or trust a brand and are sadly let down. So, you know, if you're having trouble with feeding, always give that one a shot. You never know. They behave a little bit unpredictably. Now, let's get into the gearbox. The next common issue is nozzle movement. Depicted here in colorless/gray. I don't know why this is actually, why is it, what? Okay, I'm having a brain fart moment right now. Give me a second, okay? Thank you. So, depicted here is our nozzle. What the fuck? I'm sorry. I'm really not used to this anymore. This is our nozzle. The nozzle basically moves in and out of this part of the gearbox and basically chambers BBs, blocking off the rest. You can imagine that when that nozzle is forward, I'm just going to draw over it, right, like this. This is our nozzle here. I'm going to color it in red. Then any BBs that are still behind it, like so, can't get in. And the BB that it's currently trying to fire is basically locked into here, sealed with the hop rubber and the inner barrel, and it's effectively chambered. That's what we would call that in real gun terms, right? And a very, very common issue is that nozzles don't reciprocate all the way and fail to chamber a BB. Another issue that can happen is that, again, our spring in the magazine is too weak and therefore can't push BBs back up in time for the nozzle to chamber them. Or if timing gets weird, sometimes it chambers them, sometimes it doesn't. These issues can combine together, and when they do, it is annoying. It's a very common issue, and the way to check for this is basically turn your gun upside down, take a slow motion camera. Most modern phones have a slow motion feature and a flashlight. Turn on your phone flashlight, hold it in so you can see the nozzle through the hole at the bottom of the hop unit, and just film it and watch it in slow motion. You should be able to see your nozzle all the way out of the chamber for even just a split second. And as long as you know that's the case, you know that the nozzle isn't at fault. The nozzle is activated by a knob on the sector gear, and that's connected to the tappet plate, or rather it interfaces with the tappet plate, which is then pulled back. The tappet plate is on a spring that typically sits right where I just marked it, except there's no actual spring in this graph. And that spring pulls the tappet plate forward, whereas the gear pulls it back. And now our final, least likely issue is a piston issue. Or rather, an internal gearbox compression issue. So a cylinder head, and piston issue. Basically, what could be the case is if you're getting rollers or it doesn't fire consistently, is that you have a seal issue or a similar issue where the pressure inside the cylinder doesn't get built up properly and therefore doesn't get transferred down the nozzle properly. That's actually not that common because the springs typically don't lose enough strength over time for that to be a possibility. Even with poor compression, you may notice FPS drastically dropping off, but you will almost always still be performing upwards of 0.2, 0.3 joules, which is like, at that point your BBs will still come flying out of your barrel. They'll drop off after maybe 10 meters. So it's actually, I wouldn't say it's usable, but it's theoretically functional. So you can tell. And if it's any other issues, like short stroke or similar, then what could be the case would be that... oh my god, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Basically, if it's a common issue like broken teeth on either the gears or the piston, you'll hear it. It's going to sound grindy, and it's not going to be right. There are cases where short strokes will take so much power off. Basically, a short stroke is when you intentionally remove gears from the pickup side of the sector gear. And by removing those teeth, you shorten the travel of the piston. And what can happen with that is that it gets under volume, meaning that it doesn't build up pressure properly. Or you short stroke too many teeth off and it just can't build up pressure because the spring doesn't get compressed enough for it to actually work. If you haven't done either of those things and your gun sounds normal, it's probably not an internal issue of the gearbox. It could be a nozzle issue, that would be an issue of the gearbox, but it's probably not a compression issue. And mind you, we're only talking about chambering issues. There are other issues that can happen. So, let's do a little case study here towards the end, because what prompted me to make this video was actually someone asking on Reddit, because their Valken ASL is chambering consistently on semi-auto, but inconsistently on full auto. It's skipping shots on full auto. And I would suggest there's probably 2 possible issues that could be the cause of this. 3 of them to be exact, but I think considering that it's a Valken ASL, we can rule out that 3rd one. So I want you guys to take a second to think about this, and then we're going to run through this cycle together, and I'm going to walk you through my thought process. And my thought process isn't objectively correct, but I have some experience on the topic, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of quiet time to think. Feel free to pause the video, and leave your ideas, what could be wrong, in the comments below while I pour myself a drink. Alright. Thought it through? Alright, let's start with the ones that we can rule out. We can rule out inner barrel because we're getting a couple of consistent shots. If you're having an inner barrel issue, then you will not be getting consistent performance, and it certainly won't be linkable to the fire mode. The user said the only issue is that it doesn't consistently chamber on full auto. On full auto it skips. So, we can rule out the inner barrel, because it would be inconsistent. We wouldn't be able to find consistency, or it would consistently just outright not work. Next issue. Could it be the hop rubber? Theoretically possible, but again, we can link it to full auto. Basically, the hop rubber, same story. If it's worn out, it might cause BBs to fly inconsistently. It might cause some BBs occasionally to not fly at all. But that would also occur in semi-auto. This would not be linkable to full auto. And we can say the exact same thing about the hop setting / tension. Because again, if it was too tight, this wouldn't be a full auto or semi-auto issue. It would just not fire. Or just not work, regardless of fire mode. So next possibility, is it a nozzle issue? No, it's not a nozzle issue because we're getting consistent chambering, especially on semi. Now, now we're gonna get to the ones that I think it could be that we can't rule out. So, and then I'm gonna talk about the ones that it could be, but that I think are really unlikely because they occur very, very rarely. Let's start with the tappet plate. Tappet plate is one that doesn't occur very often. Tappet plates usually either break or don't break. There's very rare cases where tappet plates are too flexible, and so over time they get worn out, and this bit over here that interfaces with the knob on the sector gear gets bent backwards, and doesn't consistently function. This is a possibility. I can't rule this out. The behavior would actually be consistent with semi-auto versus full auto, because basically on semi-auto it would have time in a disconnected space, in a resting phase essentially, and therefore not be under constant strain and perform differently from full auto where the gear is constantly spinning, and therefore the lip on the tappet plate is constantly under stress. That said, I find this very unlikely. It is a very, very uncommon issue. And seeing as we are getting consistent shots on semi, I don't believe this is our cause in this situation. However, if everything else fails, that would be the last thing I would check. It is a cheap fix if this is the problem, so I wouldn't stress too much about it. And tappet plates are very readily available. They're made out of soft plastic. They're easy to modify if you get the wrong brand. I wouldn't be worried about it. Now, next possibility. Is it a seal issue? No, because we're getting consistent FPS, so it's not a seal issue. It could, however, be a piston/sector gear issue. If this gun has been upgraded, which in this case it hasn't, so this is another theoretical scenario that could occur with other guns, not in this case, we could be getting PME, premature engagement. This occurs when your sector gear turns too fast for your strength of spring, and therefore catches your piston before it's fully returned to the front, meaning that you only get a tiny little gust of air out the nozzle before it's yanked back. This would result in low power. It is more likely to occur in full auto than semi-auto because guns tend to perform better or faster in general in full auto. So this is something that can occur, but I find it incredibly unlikely in this scenario, especially seeing as this is an unmodified Vulcan ASL. There is no way in hell that motor and those 18:1 gears are spinning that fast on a stock spring. So let's talk about what I think this comes down to. And what I think this comes down to is a magazine issue. So Reddit OP, if you're seeing this, if you have another mag, try another mag. Tell me if it helps at all, if it makes a difference. And try maybe pushing your magazine into the mag well while you shoot on full auto and see if that makes any difference. So, what do I think is actually happening here? My estimate is that we either have a 2-week spring or a poor seating here. A 2-week spring would mean that if the nozzle moves relatively quickly, which it probably does because the return forward is independent of the sector gear, and cheaper brands tend to actually use fairly strong tappet plate springs, there is a chance that the nozzle is occasionally, especially on full auto, where the sector gears are turning faster than normal, because full auto doesn't have active brake, it doesn't have to cut the cycles, so there's no spin down time in between shots. Basically, the faster action of the sector gear is causing the tappet plate and nozzle to return to the front faster than the weak magazine spring can feed BBs into it. This is actually an issue that we very commonly observe on high performance builds. A lot of high rate of fire HPA builds and any gun that runs in excess of 30-40 rounds per second has a chance of encountering this issue that's relatively high, where a lot of magazines aren't going to consistently feed with it because the magazine spring, the follower spring, isn't strong enough to push the BBs in. And quite frankly, with a poor magazine or a wore-out spring, this can occur with any gun. This is not an issue that's unique to high-performance builds. So, that is my estimate for what is the most likely thing to be happening here. So, try it with a different mag, tell me how that works out. Beyond that, another option that could be the case here, if this is a different brand of mag, maybe it has a little bit of wobble in the mag well, in which case we could be having an issue where full auto causes faster wobbling, meaning that this aligns differently and we just have a greater sample size, so it just doesn't chamber sometimes. Basically, this slips off the feed tube of the hop unit, and therefore the blocker gets pushed into the way of the BBs, and the BBs release slowly or inconsistently due to a poor seat here. And that's exasperated by the faster shaking in full auto fire. So, we've done ourselves a little bit of a case study here, a little bit of a basic explanation on how to troubleshoot feeding issues. If you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, except for the person on Reddit who actually asked me this question. Please just DM me. I'm always going to be answering questions on my channel, at least for the next couple of months. I'm a small YouTuber, so I have plenty of time to do so. So if you have questions regarding this, leave them down below and I will answer them to the best of my knowledge and experience. Right. With that said, have a nice day. You know, if this was helpful to you, maybe check out some of my other videos. I have some tech-related ones, some gun breakdowns, stuff like that. You know, have a nice one, most of all. Hey, and if this helped you, maybe leave a like. I appreciate it. I'll see you next time. I'm Stardust, you're Stardust, we are all Stardust, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.